It darted like a stupendous monster of nightmares to the monolith, about which it flung its gigantic scaly arms, the while it bowed its hideous head and gave vent to certain measured sounds. I think I went mad then. So, what I'm going to talk about today is the stories of H.P. Lovecraft. So if you haven't heard about Lovecraft, that's an American author who was born in 1890 in Providence. He was the founding father of modern horror, actually. He was the first author that really captured a sense of dread that encompasses the whole humankind, and that we're actually not important among the bigger forces of the universe who just don't care about us. And the horror stories at the time until then, notably also of Edgar Allan Poe, were just more ghost stories about something creepy happening to a bunch of people, but that's about it. And yeah, the stories with Lovecraft really shook this whole notion that humankind is all so important. And he also coined the Cthulhu Mythos. So what's that? It's this whole pantheon of elder gods he invented that really come from outer space or another dimension. Yeah, and really don't care about humankind and just have to be kept in check. And they stand not so much for precise entities, but for bigger ideas. Another thing that's really interesting with Lovecraft is that he writes in a pretty, at first, complicated style, you might think. Especially his earlier works are much more influenced by Lord Dunsany and Edgar Allan Poe. When I started reading Lovecraft, I had the book in front of me and a dictionary next to me just to look stuff up. But once you made this hurdle, there are some really great and really terrifying, interesting stories. Well, I discovered personally Lovecraft with this book. It was in 2008, and I was playing once again Alone in the Dark. And there I realized that somewhere in the game it says, "Thank you, H.P. Lovecraft." And I thought, I've heard this name, but I don't know anything about H.P. Lovecraft. So, well, why not get this book? I just typed in H.P. Lovecraft in Amazon, and H.P. Lovecraft, The Call of Cthulhu and Other Weird Stories came up. I was living in Berlin actually at the time, just started reading on the subway trains and city trains. Yeah, it took me about 2 months or so reading this whole book, and after that I was just hooked. Every time I travel back to Berlin, I always take this book with me, and as you can see it's pretty beaten up, but it's actually my most favorite book so far. I was in the city of Berlin at fall or early winter at the time, and every time I read these stories again, I actually have the notion of, it's cold, it's dreadful outside, there's the smell of the subway, which is not really a pleasant smell, plus the music I have in my ears, which is very, very important also to Lovecraft, which is the music of Buckethead. So Buckethead, subway trains, Lovecraft gets me every time. So, if you're interested in Lovecraft yourself and want to read some of these stories, where can you get them? Well, Lovecraft died in 1937, and his works are pretty much public domain. You can get them anywhere. There's even websites where you can read all his works and all his letters. And also, if you prefer printed works, there's the H.P. Lovecraft anthology. I got this one via Amazon. It's just all his works in one book. I'm not a friend of this edition because I don't like the font so much, and it's not really edited or something, and there are no annotations. The thing about annotations, which is why I prefer this one, the Penguin Classics edition of H.P. Lovecraft, The Call of Cthulhu and Other Weird Stories, is because It is annotated by S.T. Joshi, the biographer of H.P. Lovecraft, and it's like a commentary track to a film or something, because at some point you have these little footnotes and you just flip to the back and read the annotation there. And sometimes this is really insightful, or it gives you a little bit more perspective or the grander picture of how Lovecraft wrote this story or what his influences were and that kind of stuff. I think if you're a little bit into horror and haven't touched on H.P. Lovecraft so far, you should definitely check it out.
I heard it well up from the innermost depths of the damnable open sepulchre, as I watched amorphous, necrophagous shadows dance beneath an accursed waning moon. And this is what it said.
You fool, Warren is dead. I'm Batman.